Hello everyone, bringing you the follow-up today to the video which I uploaded a week ago. And this is of course again looking at 27 Brigade, specifically a private of the Middlesex Regiment, after arriving in Korea in 1950. Now the kit shown in the previous video, and I talked a little bit about the details of their arrival as well, showed a private having just landed in Korea at Pusan in August of 1950. We're looking now at a week on, and it was within a week that the men of the Argylls and the Middlesex Regiment found themselves in the front lines of the Pusan perimeter, fighting alongside the US 1st Cavalry Division. As already said, the brigade as sent to Korea was not fully constituted. It essentially consisted of the 2 infantry battalions and very few supporting troops. So the brigade had to rely on the US units for logistical support and latterly for fire support in the form of a heavy mortar unit which was attached. We'll get into that perhaps in a little bit more detail in a future video. What had been requested by US commanders were infantry, and it's fair to say, in their own words, that many of the men who had been on occupation duties in Japan, the US forces who found themselves in Korea, were not prepared for the war which was thrust upon them. In contrast, the men of 27 Brigade had been training in hilly terrain in the new territories in Hong Kong prior to shipping out to Korea, and were very much prepared in terms of their fighting ability, if not perhaps when the winter came around, in terms of their kit and equipment, and that again is something we'll get into in future videos. But what we're going to look at in this video is the kit and equipment of a private, the Middlesex, essentially a recreation of the same chap, if you will, as we looked at in the previous video, but now in the field, so not wearing the full marching order and everything which it arrived in. This basically means we can look at this as a private in the Middlesex or in the Argylls, as there are no regimental distinctions. However, it is not uncommon, particularly amongst the Argylls, to see some insignia worn on the jungle green uniform. It seems to be less common with the Middlesex, and in some instances they did wear their regimental headdress in the field. We'll talk about that a little bit more as the video progresses and we look at the kit, and we'll get into that now. As you can see, the kit here is considerably lighter than that we looked at in the previous video. Obviously the pack has been dispensed with and the haversack's been moved to the back, so the web equipment's being worn in battle order. We'll get into that a little bit more as we talk about the kit through the video. Again, the weapon carried is the rifle number 4, the standard British rifle at the time. The basic uniform is the same as that which we looked at previously. That is the Jacket Bush SCC 19 green and matching trousers. As I said previously, there's a collectorism for this, which is the 1947 pattern, not an official designation, but it was introduced in 1947, so it's a useful shorthand for this particular uniform, the 1947 pattern bush jacket and trousers. And as already said, alongside some British manufactured jungle green clothing, Indian made jungle green clothing was still being issued at this point as well. Headgear consists of the classic British jungle hat, this particular example being a 1945 dated example, and it's worn with the left brim turned up, which is a very typical thing to see in Korea. Occasionally the upturned brim might bear a regimental flash, though this is by no means universal. As already said, some photographs do show regimental headdress being worn, be it the tam o' shanter for the Argylls, or the beret which we looked at in the previous video for the Middlesex, the range of headgear we talked about in that video, and cap comforters are also seen in some photographs as well. The web equipment is that which we looked at previously, which is the 1937 pattern. The basic pouches at the front here are of late Second World War manufacture, showing the quick release design, as I said, very common to see amongst men of 27 Brigade. On the left hip, the bayonet for the number 4 rifle is carried, and this is no longer obscured by the haversack as it was in the previous video, and we can see this is carried in a late war manufactured bayonet frog, and this includes a woven buttonhole in the top loop to take the thinner scabbard of the spike bayonet. As this web equipment is worn in battle order, the haversack has been moved to the back, and the contents would be fairly standard. The green cardigan, which had been introduced as part of the late war jungle equipment, is very commonly seen in period photographs. Obviously when not worn, that would be carried in here. The cap comforter, the hold all, spare socks, mess tins, essentially the standard contents that you'd expect to see at the time. You'll notice we've not looked at the water bottle and its carrier on the right hip, and this is because the entrenching tool, which is normally carried on the brace ends at the rear of the equipment, has been removed, and the water bottle is carried in its place in this instance. Again, footwear consists of the general service boots, the ammo boots, and these are worn, once again, with anklets blancoed in the same colour as the web equipment. A small note on the choice of blanco colour here. In period photographs it does appear that the web equipment is a lighter colour than the jungle green uniform itself, so I've chosen a blanco colour which replicates that and is a lighter shade of green than the uniform itself. So that's a brief rundown of the kit worn here. The haversack would often be dispensed with as well. It's very common to see. Obviously, men in the initial phases were in relatively static defence in the Pusan perimeter, so the haversack would quite often be dispensed with in such situations. The uniform, as shown here, would actually differ very little, perhaps other than the inclusion of the cardigan sweater and the cap comforter, right the way through into the autumn months in Korea. As the temperature began to drop, the brigade had to rely on stocks of American cold weather clothing, acquired via various methods. Some sources say they were issued cold weather equipment. Some veterans recall acquiring cold weather clothing via other channels. But that's something for another video. That will be covered later in the year when we talk about 27 Brigade entering the Korean winter of 1950-51. But that's a run through of this kit, which represents a private in the Middlesex Regiment fighting through the heat of the Korean summer. So there we are. I do hope you found that interesting. This series I intend to continue over the coming years, looking at various different points of Commonwealth involvement during the Korean War. I'm not going to be able to make this, I think from the kit I have in my collection, I'm not going to be able to make this comprehensive, but I should be able to cover some interesting bits and pieces, and hopefully I'll be able to put together a nice video for the formation of the British Commonwealth Division, which of course happened in July of 1951. So hopefully by then I'll have a nice selection of kit to be able to show some typical soldiers from the division, from the different Commonwealth forces that constituted the division at that point. But anyway, as I say, I hope you found this video interesting in the main. If you'd like to see the videos which are upcoming, looking at British and Commonwealth forces in Korea, please do consider subscribing if you haven't already. And whether you're newly subscribing or you've already subscribed, please do make sure you hit the little bell, the little notification button down below, which of course will alert you when I upload future videos. If you really like my uploads and you'd like to support the channel, you can. There's both a Patreon and a PayPal link down below. And as ever, a massive thank you to everybody who supports the channel using those two methods. It's greatly appreciated, and I, as always, thank you very much indeed. If you'd like to follow the channel on social media, you can. There's Facebook, Instagram and Twitter, all linked down below. And if you want to get in touch with me but you don't really use social media, there is of course an email address down there as well. But that's everything I wanted to cover in this video, so until next time, bye for now.